On today's podcast, we're talking about the adage from the great philosopher, Mr. Rogers, who said, what is mentionable can become more manageable. We'll dive into what that means for leaders, teams, and organizations, for creating cultures where the most important dialogue is not only mentionable, but manageable. Welcome back to The Thermostat with Jason Barger. If you're currently on a commute, a walk, or just a micro break in your day, glad you're making time to step back, to think, and to reflect on the next steps on your journey. I've never been more convinced the best leaders and team cultures in the world are the ones that make time to step back, breathe in good oxygen, and calibrate their thermostat. I hope today's conversation leaves you feeling grounded and inspired. Now let's dive into today's topic to engage our minds and hearts in order to authentically lead and create compelling cultures wherever we are in the world. Hey everybody, it's Jason and welcome back to the Thermostat Podcast. Wherever you are, however you're coming to the podcast today, welcome back. So glad you're here. So glad you're making time to be with us. If you are one of the OGs that have been with us from the very beginning of this podcast, welcome back. So glad you continue to come back, and this continues to be a place that adds value to your life, your work, thinking about who you are, who you're hoping to be, and the cultures that you're hoping to create with the people around you. So glad this continues to be a great spot for you. And if you're new to the podcast, welcome. So glad you're here. I'll invite you to go back, listen to a lot of great episodes, so many great micro pods, short pods about different topics and things that hopefully are interesting and add value to your life and work, as well as great conversations with thought leaders from around the world. So I hope you'll dive in and catch up, be a part of this, and be engaged in these conversations. So my commitment to you, as always, is that I want to be a place for you to be able to step back, whether that's in your day, your week, your month, a time for you to step back, to think about your life and work, and think about, hopefully be filled with positive messages that help you think about the culture you're trying to create in your life and your work, and the person that you're aiming to be. None of us perfectly, but what is it that you're trying to do and set forth for the people around you? So before we dive into today's topic, if you will do me a quick favor, if you will rate the podcast 5 stars, of course. This is just the way that it works. So if the algorithms want to search and know who's rating what. So if you'll take a moment, if you'll rate it 5 stars on whatever platform you're on. The other way the algorithms work is if you leave a positive review in your own words, whatever's authentic to you about episodes that mean something to you, have resonated, or just in general about the podcast, that helps other people find it. And obviously sharing the podcast, anytime you share it on social media or an episode that resonates with you, with your colleagues or friends or whatever that is, and invite people to say, hey, listen to this, and then let's talk about it. Those are the ways in which these messages are amplified and spread around the world. And that obviously is the goal. All free content, but let's share it and add value to people along the way. So thanks for everybody that takes the time to do that. I'm excited about today's episode because the great philosopher, Mr. Rogers, that is, the great philosopher, yes, Mr. Rogers, he once said, anything that is human is mentionable, and anything that is mentionable can be more manageable. When we talk about our feelings, they become less overwhelming, less upsetting, and less scary. That's a Mr. Rogers mic drop. So we're going to break that down on this episode because I love this idea that what is mentionable becomes more manageable. What is mentionable becomes more manageable. In a time when mental health challenges are on the rise, let alone the awareness we have around what is required to have healthy relationships and teams in a world that navigating so many different obstacles, we have to be able to make things we're seeing, thinking, and feeling mentionable. When they are mentionable, they become more manageable. They become less overwhelming and less scary. We then are able to begin to develop strategies to move us forward and stimulate progress on whatever we are working on together. So, on today's podcast, we're talking about the adage from the great philosopher, Mr. Rogers, who said, what is mentionable can become more manageable. We'll dive into what that means for leaders, teams, and organizations for creating cultures where the most important dialogue is not only mentionable, but manageable. But before we dive into today's topic, let's pause and take a break, and we'll be right back. If you haven't done so already, we hope you'll visit Amazon or Amplify or jasonvbarger.com to check out Breathing Oxygen, my new book that is all about breathing good oxygen into ourselves and mindsets that fuel ourselves and the teams and the organizations around us. Positive, healthy thinking is as essential to great leadership and building a winning culture as the air we breathe. Leading yourself and a team of people has never been more complicated than it is today. As a leader, every move you make is either breathing life into your organization or slowly killing it. The atmosphere can easily turn toxic with negativity, blame, and doubt poisoning the culture. Just like every being on the planet needs good air to breathe, every organization needs leadership that breathes life into its people to sustain the energy required to complete its mission. Breathing Oxygen focuses on 6 key leadership mindsets that breathe life into any team: clarity, inclusivity, mental agility, grit, rest, and ownership. Join us, read, and share Breathing Oxygen.
Available now from Amplify Books on Amazon and jasonvbarger.com.
If you are an avid listener, again, of this podcast, then you know how important I believe the development of our emotional intelligence is as developing leaders and cultures. Again, I have past episodes that dive into, if you just Google Jason Barger emotional intelligence, you'll see all kinds of episodes. If you search through this podcast and just look for emotional intelligence, you'll see a number of different episodes where we dive into the different elements of emotional intelligence. But I think it's important for this topic today, again, that we just quickly remind ourselves of a definition, because it's gonna make sense for what we're the topic for today, that we want to make sure that we're defining emotional intelligence in the same language. Emotional intelligence is defined as our ability to recognize and understand the emotions in yourself and others, and then your ability to use this awareness to manage your behavior and your relationships. So again, if you're a listener to this podcast, you remember the 2 different sides that are at play here in emotional intelligence. There's the personal competency side, based on what it is that I or you as a person, what you see, what you're feeling, your own awareness. Do you know yourself? Do you understand what you're experiencing and feeling, what you know about yourself in the moment? And based on that self-awareness, your own self-management. What is it you choose to do? Based on what you're seeing, feeling, thinking, what you know about yourself and the situation, what behavior do you choose to put into place? Then there's the social competency side, which this is social awareness around other people. So social competency is, again, what do you see? What do you perceive others to be feeling? What do you know about them? Your own social awareness of that. And then based on the situation and based on what you know about them, what is it you choose to do? What's the behavioral response to develop that relationship? And you may remember that I cited statistics in the past where studies show that 58% of all performance, all tasks, all projects, everything of our performance is actually tied to this either ability or inability to practice this kind of emotional intelligence. That beyond our skill and our expertise in whatever subject area we're in, our performance comes down to our ability or inability to manage ourselves and manage develop relationships with other people. So our own personal awareness, our ability to listen, and then the response really, studies show is about 58% of all performance, which means a massive opportunity for teams and organizations and leaders to be trying to strengthen this level of thinking, acting, and interacting within their teams and organizations to increase performance. So our own awareness and ability to enter into courageous conversations to mention, to make things mentionable that with which we are struggling with or needing to talk about is the first step. Once we mention it, as Mr. Rogers reminds us, it becomes more manageable. What is mentionable becomes more manageable. Then we can begin to get a plan for how to move ourselves forward. But as you've heard me talk about on past podcast episodes, what often gets in the way of us mentioning what needs to be rediscussed or discussed in healthy ways is what is known as triangulation or team communication, which again, you can go back and listen to a whole episode I did on this idea of triangulation and team communication. But the quick thing that you may remember if you're kind of linking some of these ideas together is this dynamic of triangulation happens in every group of humans on the planet where more than two people are gathered. And it goes something like this. There's person A and person B and person C. Person A and B have a disagreement with each other, a conflict, a rub with one another. And who does person B typically go find? They go find person C, right? That forms the triangle in triangulation. And person C, and they often go to that person and they want to then gripe to that person, talk about person A. They want to explain the situation, and that's just what happens in groups of humans. But person C in every group and team on the planet plays an enormous role and on how they decide to handle this situation. And as leaders, we often find ourselves playing the role of person C quite often because different people on the team might come to you, seek you out to share their thoughts with you. And so the choice that person C makes in that moment is, as somebody comes to them to talk about another person, is, am I going to breathe oxygen into the flames or am I going to breathe oxygen into the person? And what I mean by that is person C makes a choice of either when person B comes to them and is, complaining or griping or gossiping about somebody else, are they going to breathe oxygen into the flames, which means they're going to just kind of throw gasoline on the fire or breathe oxygen to make the flames bigger, where they say, oh my gosh, you're right, that person is wrong, and they just join in the gossip? Or are they going to make a different choice and they're going to choose to breathe oxygen into the person, which means they listen, they absorb what the person has, that sometimes people need a third party to just kind of talk things through. But then once they get to that point where they've listened and absorbed, instead of breathing oxygen into the flames, they breathe oxygen back into the person. And they say, I'm sorry to hear this. This must be frustrating. I can tell you're upset. Man, but I know that person. I know person A. And my guess is this is a misunderstanding. My guess is this is just you both approaching things differently. Maybe you don't fully understand each other's strengths, and so you're coming at it from a different perspective. Again, if you listen to past pods about understanding strengths, that reference will make more sense to you. But you start to understand that, hey, there's probably more at play here. And rather than gossiping behind their back, I'm going to encourage you, and I want to support you to go have that conversation directly with person A. And in doing that, my commitment to you will be I'll check back with you in a week and see how that goes. And I want to support both of you in having good, healthy conversations and dialogue along the way. Let's not talk about it behind backs. Let's see if this is something that we need to really mention, because once it's more mentionable, it becomes more manageable. Whenever I'm describing this kind of triangulation within teams and organizations, I often ask people, is this realistic, what I'm describing? And most people, after we say, well, I don't know, that this sounds, Pollyannic or something, eventually we get to the point where they say, is it realistic? Yes. Is it easy? No. Is it realistic? Of course it is. It's realistic. And can it happen? Absolutely. Is it easy? No, because it's oftentimes easier to go gossip, talk behind somebody's back, complain about something. And yet what we find is that healthy leaders and healthy teams and healthy cultures that practice and model this kind of healthy team communication and breathe oxygen into the people, that models for people and shows people this is how we do this. This is how we breathe. This is the air that we breathe on this team. This is the temperature we set for how we communicate, how we honor each other, and how we walk the talk of being a team. And so every time we practice it that way and show that this is the way we're going to handle things, big or small, that becomes the culture of the way we talk, the way we communicate. And therefore, things that become mentionable become more manageable. If they aren't mentioned, or they're only mentioned in quiet corridors and back office hallways or gossip, then they're not, they don't become out in the open to be more manageable, and they tend to fester and become bigger than they really need to be. You've heard me reference the Gottman Institute out in Seattle, but they did research long ago where they actually, with great success and accuracy, just by looking at a two people in a relationship, they can, by studying their behavior with one another, they can see that they can predict which relationships are going to last and which relationships are going to falter. And really, the research comes down to the relationships that will last have a 5-to-1 ratio. 5 positive interactions to every 1 negative interaction. And the research really bears out pretty simply that the individual relationships that have a 5-to-1 or greater, positive to negative interaction experience are the ones that last, and that would be true in a team setting as well. And those that have the relationships that don't last tend to have a 0.8 positive interactions to 1 negative, which again isn't rocket science to think that the ones that end up not working are the ones that have either an equal 1-to-1 ratio of positive to negative, or even more negative than positive. And very quickly you can see that leaders who understand this, and teams and organizations that are committed to helping their people breathe better and model a different way of communicating and making things mentionable so that they're more manageable, not only because it's just the right thing to do, but also because it helps our performance expand. It helps individual relationships, but also entire teams and organizations. So these kinds of leaders, teams, and organizations realize they need to be to continuously be in the business of clearing up the vision for the future, modeling and showing people how we're going to communicate and what kind of transparency we're committed to how we communicate and how we bring things that we need to mention. We make things mentionable so that then they can become more manageable. These are the ones that helps individuals breathe better and helps entire teams and organizations breathe good oxygen and have healthier ways in which they mention the things that they need to in order to manage them more effectively. Team communication isn't something that just naturally comes together. Again, like anything, we have to teach it. You've heard me again in past episodes talk about in culture shaping, what we allow lingers, the habits, behaviors, practices that we allow that are counter to the culture we want. Those kind of things linger and fester and become the culture. And so when we notice those things, we've got to teach new habits, new behaviors, new policies, new ways of behaviors to trigger the positive chain reaction we want in alignment with the culture we're trying to create. So we got to model it. We got to practice it. We got to develop it. We've got to rinse and repeat. And eventually, over time, culture shaping is not a drive-through experience. It happens over time, years and years. It just becomes, this is the way we do it. It becomes the air that we breathe. Then we start to practice. The things that are mentionable become more manageable. But it becomes the way it becomes the way that we do it because of countless intentional actions along the way that shows people this is how we breathe, this is how we communicate, this is how we're committed, that when we have something to mention, like let's make it mentionable so we can then manage it. If it's not mentionable, then we don't need to mention it. But if it's something that truly is mentionable, let's make sure we talk about it so that it can become more manageable. We have to first be courageous enough to mention how we're feeling and what we're experiencing. And we also have to create space for others to be able to mention how they might be feeling or what they're experiencing. And then we can create a strategy of how are we going to manage this? How will we move forward to navigate the challenges and pursue the mission at hand? Again, you may be thinking this is true for every relationship. This might be for a friend of yours. This might be a spouse. This may be somebody that you're in a unique relationship with. And certainly for the teams and organizations we serve, what is mentionable becomes more manageable. So some questions to ponder for today. What is weighing on you or those around you that might need to be mentioned? What is weighing on you or those around you that might need to be mentioned? When will you create space to help mention the challenges we might be facing as a team that can lead into how we might commit to managing the road ahead? What strategies do you need to deploy next to mention and manage what you're facing? I hope today's episode got you thinking in many new ways. If a deeper dive to any of these topics is interesting to you, please reach out to us. Email is info@jasonvbarger.com, info@jasonvbarger.com, and let us know. We'll continue to design content to help meet you where you are. Lastly, I hope you'll go back and listen to a number of the past episodes that we've had. There's so many great topics that will add value to you, so hope you do that. Cheers to you and the path ahead, and remember that the future of leadership is you, is me, is us, and that we need to get clear on the cultures that we're trying to create and the temperature we hope to set, and then be courageous and committed to breathing good oxygen into the mindsets and actions that will sustain our path forward. Step back. Remember, be a thermostat and breathe good oxygen. Thank you for listening to today's podcast, and I hope the messages and questions stimulate positive change along your path. As always, if these messages resonate with you and add value to your life, I hope you'll help amplify them throughout the world. Please rate, comment, and share on whatever podcast or social media platform you're using, and share this podcast with the people in your life or work who should be part of these conversations. That way, this spirit does, in fact, spread. If these messages or developing leaders and culture would be helpful to you and your organization, please contact us at jasonvbarger.com, jasonvbarger.com. And remember, we are all ambassadors for the culture we want to create in our life and work. We have to own the vision we want to be a part of. The future of leadership is you, is me, is us. Be a thermostat.